All right. I think we will get started. This is our third or fourth adult forum on Orange Shirt Day. So welcome you this morning and thank you to everyone who found the one piece of orange clothing in your closet. I want to start. First of all, let me start by giving a plug for today's sermon. Well done. If you haven't heard it, go upstairs and listen. This is maybe better termed the unseeing man and Lazarus. And the piece I want to highlight, which was highlighted as well in the sermon, and no, we did not talk last night, is that it wasn't being rich that caused the man to stumble. It was not seeing what was in front of him. And so we have an illustration here of the rich man, quote unquote, and Lazarus. He never saw Lazarus sitting at his gate, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, never saw him. And today we will talk about children who are now adults that we don't see. And until 1969, we're actually away from the community. And when they came back, the trauma was so great, the stories were never told. And we don't see them because the people in power, the adults in the room, write the history, and the children do not. So that was not a joyous welcome, but a welcome. We will be taking some photos during the adult forum to share with the Synod, and to try to push the Synod a little bit in this direction. So just FYI, if you don't want your photo taken, dive under the table. We'll start with our land acknowledgement here from St. Mark's. We'll talk a little bit about Orange Shirt Day as a reminder to some of you and maybe something new for others of you. I'll talk also about the Truth and Healing movement in the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, of which St. Mark's is a member, particularly about the truth-seeking and truth-telling initiative and the memorial that went to the Churchwide assembly in July of this year. And then end with a little bit on the Senate bill that is making its way glacially through the upper chamber in Washington. So that's where we're going. And we think we've allowed time for conversation at the end. We'll see. Bear with me and we'll see.
All right, as Margaret said, we'll begin with the land acknowledgement. You can read it with me if you'd like, or you can just listen. St. Mark's Square sits on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of what is called the San Francisco Peninsula, and who were the first to gather, love, row, cry, celebrate, and sing in this place. We acknowledge and mourn the exploitation of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples and the destruction of their ancestors' homeland and culture. We honor the Ramaytush Ohlone for their enduring commitment to this land, Mother Earth, and to all of creation. We honor their ancestors and all other members of their communities. We value Indigenous wisdom in working toward the healing of creation. With God's help, we strive to grow toward right relationships with Indigenous peoples and the earth. With openness of heart and spirit, we hold ourselves accountable to respect and steward the land, its grasses and trees, and creatures great and small. Let it be so in all our relations. Orange Shirt Day, the objectives of Orange Shirt Day are really to listen, which is what we're doing here, to learn, to remember, to understand that this is not our story to tell, to acknowledge that we all need healing, and to pray. And on that note, we'll say this prayer to start us off. Loving and forgiving God, we acknowledge that our past is filled with scars inflicted upon Indigenous people who were forced to attend boarding school, in which they were brought up to their identity, and that legacy continues throughout the generations. You invite us to heal this broken history by living as different people today and into our future, as we seek to learn what it means to walk together. Give us courage to confess and own what is ours, so that our future is healing. Amen. So Orange Shirt Day, just the kind of reason that it's called Orange Shirt Day and the symbolism of the orange shirt, and you may have heard this if you've been to future or to previous forums. Phyllis Webstad was a founder of the Orange Shirt Society. She's Native American, all of her tribal affiliations are listed there, and she was one of the people that was sent to the boarding schools in the early 70s. She was 6 years old, which is my daughter's age. And she went to the school kind of excited, her family got her a new outfit to go to the school, and it was an orange shirt, really, fancy, and she just really loved that shirt. And so she felt excited to go to her first day of school, but didn't realize really what was awaiting her there. So when they got there, as was the custom in the schools, they took all of the children's clothes, and confiscated them. They never gave them back their clothes. And so that was something she remembered through her whole life, is how they took that orange shirt away from her. And so that became a symbol of what was taken and how to remember the children and the stories. So we as a country did make some progress with Deb Haaland as a Native American Secretary of the Interior. And so there was a investigation with the Department of Interior and a report with the Bureau of Indian Affairs came out in 2022. They did look at as many schools as they could find information about. The schools generally operated from the 1800s, mid 1800s, until federal funding was stopped in 1969 after a series of reports in the 60s about kind of what was happening at these schools. There were 408 federal schools. There were several others that didn't have federal funding. They ran in 37 states, so they're pretty widespread throughout the country. And there are burial sites, and that's part of also what Canada is doing, is finding the unmarked graves of the children, because many children died at these schools, and because of the malnourishment, maltreatment. And so part of this, the kind of work that's happening now is finding where the children are buried, and where possible, returning to them to their homes and to their ancestral homelands, back to their communities. And up to 85% of Native American children were sent to these schools. So it was a huge part of the population. To be called a federal Indian boarding school, they had some criteria to define the federal. One of them was obviously federal support. Also, they were boarding schools, so the children lived there, overnight housing. I think sometimes they went back for kind of school breaks, but typically they just were there kind of forever. There was education, typically vocational training, and religious training. I don't think they were so interested in the academic success of the children, but more about vocational training and indoctrination. And then the time frame was before 1969, because federal funding was cut in 1969, and after that there was a movement to turn some of the education back over to the tribes or assimilate it into the school systems in the states. But it's not like all the schools immediately shut down in 1969, but their mission changed and they did stop conscripting the children at that time. There was this Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition also doing work and research into what happened there. They found 526 boarding schools because there were 99 that didn't have federal support. So those were church all funded, for example, or had other sources of support that were part of the official government schools. And there, as I mentioned, there are still 125 schools today that are operating that were originally residential boarding schools. So the legacy is still alive. Religious institutions played a large role in these schools. They sponsored or operated half of the schools, and often the government paid religious institutions per child for the kids to attend. So they had motivation to get as many children as they could into the schools in order to receive funding. There's a refrain during that time, kill the Indian, save the man, and their really focus was civilizing or assimilating the children. They cut their hair immediately. The long hair was often a symbol of tribal identity and had a lot of significance to the children, so they cut that immediately. They wouldn't let them use their names. They renamed all of them with Western names, forbade any sort of language, religious, cultural practices, and in that way, a lot of language was lost. And then also it was just a lot of manual labor, harsh punishments. I mean, they were really like work camps more so than schools. And this has caused generational trauma, not only on the children who were there, who are, up until 1969, I mean, that's my parents were teenagers at that time. So this is very, many people who live now were part of, were children and students at these schools. So, physical health problems from the maltreatment and malnourishment, mental health trauma, and then certainly the related problems such as addiction and loss of connections. We were talking, in the sermon today about relational connections, and that was one of the things that was immediately taken away and forbidden from the children. So, and not to mention loss of land, all of the other impacts of the American government's policies against Native Americans. So certainly has had ongoing impacts, which we're all reckoning with at this point. The Lutherans were involved in a couple. Margaret will talk a lot more about the Lutheran involvement and what work's being done to really understand that. And so far we know that there were 2 schools that were run by Lutherans. One was Missouri Synod, and then the other one was NLCA. And so that, we were part of this legacy. Even if we weren't the biggest part, we're still definitely a part of what had happened. So the former presiding bishop, Elizabeth Eaton, had a lot to say about this, and there was a lot of work. There is still a lot of work happening in the ELCA, but this is a quote from Bishop Eaton about, working towards understanding the history, embracing the truth, and then working towards healing. I will turn it over to Margaret to talk more about the current initiatives of truth-telling and truth-seeking.
My apologies. I assumed that you all knew who we were, but maybe you don't. And so just for a second, I'm Margaret McLean, member here at St. Mark's. This is Shannon Chang, member at St. Mark's, and also the president of the Martin Luther Tower Board. So we share this space, which is why it's the 2 of us. Okay. Back to the ELCA. President Elizabeth Eaton was very passionate about this work, and so started what was the larger initiative is the Truth and Healing Initiative. Under that, which was about repudiation of the doctrine of discovery and missing and murdered Indigenous women. It was a broader Under that comes the Truth Seeking and Truth Telling Initiative. And that's the initiative that's focused on boarding schools. And the impetus for that is Native Americans. Remember, the ELCA is headquartered where? Chicago. In the Midwest, lots of Indian reservations in the Midwest. We forget about that here. Our history in the California, in the West, is different than the history of Native Americans in the Midwest. Right, so Native Americans started calling on churches to do your work, learn your history. It's not up to us to heal you. It's up to you to learn and to heal. So the primary goal then was for the ELCA, took that challenge to identify and gather and share records and explore what and why of Lutheran involvement. Was the ELCA or its predecessor bodies, clearly, since the ELCA is relatively new in the timeline of American Lutherans. What was our complicity? So that initiative has set out looking for threads of Lutheran involvement. It's active currently in 10 states, 27 synods. ELCA has 65 synods, which are larger groups of churches in a single congregation. So they're geographic. So 27 of the 65 are active. There's 150 or more participants, both clergy and lay. And they've decided now that they're going to stop this incremental approach. And theoretically, by the end of 2025, my guess is more the beginning of 2020, the beginning to the middle of 2026, the entire ELCA will be involved in this work. They're just going to bring all the rest of the synods on board at once. And the participants, the active participants, study and learn, attend online gatherings, conduct research, and educate people, because this is a part of a conversation, part of a learning. The intention of that initiative, Truth Seeking and Truth Telling Initiative, is to share boarding school records when found with impacted families and tribal nations, understanding that those stories, those records belong to Native Americans. They don't belong to us. And to uncover and embrace the truth and promote healing for both Native Americans, but also for us. Why does it matter? Because, white Christians participated in this cultural genocide, knowing, unknowing, willing, unwilling. And that legacy lingers. Intergenerational trauma from generation to generation. What you'll hear today in the sermon of relational poverty, it's right here. Native people deserve the truth and the opportunity to heal. And most of us don't understand that we need to heal too. The chasm between us and them requires healings on both sides of the chasm. And when that healing happens, the chasm will narrow. Why does it matter? This is a quote, and I'm going to read it. Some of us are educators. I am an educator. When I heard about this, it just cut me to the core. I didn't know about this till not so long ago. And this is from the head of the Truth and Healing, Truth Seeking, Truth Telling group, who is also an educator. And this is a quote from Liz Andrus. If you were here last year, you remember we had her zoom in for the adult forum. Why does it matter? Why does this history matter? Why do we learn this? Why? I've chosen to imagine as a grandparent, my grandchildren being taken away. I've asked my congregation to imagine sitting in the pews and all of the children are gone. If they come back, they're alienated. And there's just so much pain and loss and grief just in the imagining. I can feel it in my body as the grandparent, imagining the parent, imagining the child, and then starting to get a sense of this intergenerational trauma that carries through to today. It matters. It matters that we investigate the big picture of what Indian boarding schools were. It matters. We cannot forget our history. And so today, because it's the closest Sunday to September 30th, we set aside to remember. In their looking at the archives and history in the Midwest and the synods where they are working now, they have uncovered one boarding school that belonged to a predecessor body of the ELCA. It was a church, it was a school founded by the Norwegian Lutheran Church of America, which any of you who have studied the Lutheran alphabet soup history in the United States of the Lutheran Church, there's about 3 or 4 other bodies that the NLCA became before it became the ELCA. But, whoops, wrong way. It was the Bethany Indian School was designed to aid, educate, and Christianize the local indigenous community. It was located in Wittenberg, Wisconsin. It enrolled children from Wisconsin tribes, Ho-Chunk, Oneida, and about 5 or 6 other different tribes. It operated from 1884 to 1933, and there was some federal involvement. The records of the school were meticulously kept and stored in the archives at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, which is how they found them and have been through them. Also, they've been through a number of predecessor body locations, the Lutheran Herald, the Lutheran Standard, looking for articles about the boarding schools. So this is the kind of archival work that's being done. So if we need to remember, and it does matter, what is required of us is to remember and to act. And so this summer at the ELCA Churchwide Assembly, they passed a memorial, fancy name for a resolution, right, that addresses the legacy of our church's role in Indian boarding schools. And the first action step in that memorial is to raise awareness. This is why we are here this morning, of boarding schools and of the Christian and Lutheran roles in boarding schools. And if you want to learn more and find much more go to the ELCA.org website, type in Indian boarding schools and read. And listen, there are videos as well. Pope Francis, I ask forgiveness. Remember, act. Ask for forgiveness. This is hard for us. It was hard for him. And this quote is from his visit to Kamloops in Canada. I ask forgiveness in particular for the ways in which many members of the church and of religious communities cooperated, not least through their indifference, in projects of cultural destruction and forced assimilation promoted by the governments of the time, which culminated in the system of residential schools. Residential schools in Canada, boarding schools in the United States. Same thing. So there was a memorial this summer, the ELCA Churchwide Assembly in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. I bet they got a really great rate on hotel rooms and everything. It was in July. Kept them in the room. So what is a memorial and where does it come from? The ELCA Constitution allows for memorials to come from congregations to the Churchwide Assembly, which is really the policy and setting body of the ELCA. Meets every 3 years. And there's a memorials committee. So the Memorials Committee has 14 members, which are members of the Church Council. So the ELCA structure is similar to the structure of the congregation. You know, there's someone in charge, there's a council. So there's church council members, there's bishops, there's churchwide assembly voting members, and the membership is appointed from suggestions made by bishops and other key leaders in the church. So there's 14 people who look at all the memorials that come in, and over 3 years, people think of a lot of things they want the church to do. So the way the process goes briefly is congregations draft memorials for consideration. St. Mark's drafted the memorial for boarding schools. That came from us. We submitted it to the Sierra Pacific Synod Assembly, which met in June. The resolutions committee of the Synod Assembly and Synod Council, reviewed that, recommended it to the assembly itself, who voted on it. It was passed, and once passed, since it was a memorial, it goes to Churchwide. So, St. Mark's sent that resolution to Churchwide. The Truth Telling and Truth Healing Initiative had organized 20 people in 20 synods to prepare those resolutions and get them through the synod. So 20 synods passed resolutions more or less similar to that the Sierra Pacific Synod passed that came from St. Mark's. And if there are 20 synods who put a memorial forward, you think the Memorials Committee at Churchwide is going to accept it? You betcha. So it was accepted by the Memorials Committee and sent to Churchwide Assembly. Churchwide Assembly passed it by 99.2%. I think there was like 2 people who somehow didn't get it, of the vote. Resoundingly passed. And this is what it said: to receive with gratitude the memorials of the Indian Boarding School Remembrance from, and here are the 20 synods. And this is what the memorial asks of us: to encourage and equip all congregation synods and ministries to observe the National Day of Remembrance for Indian boarding schools on or near September 30th. Check. To urge Augsburg Fortress, which is the publication arm of the ELCA, and the Service and Justice Unit of the ELCA, to publish materials and programs concerning Christian and Lutheran roles in the boarding schools. To provide ongoing recognition of and support for the growing network of lay people and rostered ministers volunteering their time and work on the Truth Telling and Truth Healing initiative. To encourage ministries affiliated with or related to the ELCA to commit to learning the truth of their involvement with Indian boarding schools. To organize and care for all the information from the Luther Seminary archives has gone to the ELCA archives in Chicago, and that's where all of this will be. There's no indication that there are other federally funded boarding schools affiliated with the ELCA predecessor bodies, but there's good indication that there are orphanages or other types of schools, non-federally funded schools that were associated with ELCA predecessor churches. And direct the Churchwide organization to identify the revenue sources that we can use for this work. They don't expect that we will do as well as the Episcopalians that put $2.5 million into this work. Good job, Episcopalians.
Can I just say though?
Yeah.
A lot more damage, so we need to put in a lot more work.
Okay, yeah, well, yes, all right. Well said. But to at least identify some revenue sources, all the work that has been done to date in the archives, looking at records, has been done by volunteers. And it's clear that we cannot take good care of the documents or make them available to Indigenous peoples without some financial support. So this was the main ask of the memorial, to urge all of us to learn and to observe. Wouldn't it be incredible if we had enough clergy and lay people involved in this particular work that it created a movement in our church, one strong enough that all 3 million plus members knew the truth about Indian boarding schools, so that healing and justice happens? What a witness that would be. That's a quote from Vance Blackfox, who is the head of Indigenous Ministries at the ELCA. So that's what the church is doing. Here's what the government is doing. There's been a bill that has gone through the Senate on more than one occasion. It gets dropped, etc. So it was in the last session of the Senate, and now it's been reintroduced. It was reintroduced in February by Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. and passed out of the Indian Affairs Committee of the US Senate in March. And it's now sitting on the legislative calendar with no particular date for a hearing, but at least it is that far. What is it asking?
Republicans involved in this at any point?
Murkowski is a Republican.
Oh,
Murkowski is a Republican. This is a bipartisan bill with 24 co-sponsors, I believe. Conspicuous by the mere absence of their presence are the two senators from California. What the bill does is it establishes the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding school policies. So this is the government looking at what the government did, right? And among its duties is to investigate the impacts and ongoing effects of those policies, this intergenerational trauma. Learn the history, understand the trauma. So they're going to look at the federal policies under which American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian children were forcibly removed from their family homes and sent to boarding schools. And the commission must develop recommendations on ways to protect unmarked graves. That is a big fear, that there are graves around these churches, around schools that need protecting. Support repatriation and identify tribal nations from which children were taken, and to discontinue the removal of American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Native Hawaiian children from their families and tribal communities, which is still going on kind of under the radar.
what are they doing? You say under the radar, what are they doing under the radar?
Well, it's a lot of it has to do with adoption policies. A lot of it has to do with forced adoption of Native children. I think we need to remember that they were children. These are children who were taken, and that every child matters. And what's being asked is for truth, for justice, and for healing. What's being asked is to bridge that chasm that you either have heard about in today's sermon already or will hear about at 11, and to remember and to act. Indigenous people, this is a quote from the film Sugarcane, which is a remarkably impactful film done by National Geographic. It's a documentary about the St. Joseph's Industrial Mission School in Kamloops, British Columbia. It's available on Apple TV, Google, YouTube. This quote stood out to me. Indigenous people are still dying from residential schools and still living despite them. Indigenous people are still dying from residential schools and still living despite them. So this is just I'm an academic, as most of you know, so here are my lists of references and acknowledgements. Part of the habit of teaching. So we will open it up we have some questions to ask you, but we'll open it up for questions or comments now. Shannon has the microphone. And we'll do our best on questions. I am no expert here. We are no experts here. The experts are the indigenous people who have lived this. So-
Good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to know if the ELCA does visits to any of the reservations that have been affected by this policy.
They certainly have a presence on reservations. Most of those are in the Midwest. I'm trying to remember where we actually have a school in South Dakota. Somebody help me. It's Sioux Falls, it's in Flandreau, South Dakota. I can't remember the name of the reservation. But yes, and they're talking to indigenous people as well.
My question is, I mean, if this bill passes, what are gonna be the ramifications? Like, for instance, I think there, for black slavery, they wanna have reparations. Now, that's a kettle of worms. As if you can trace your ancestry back to some slavery, then you get a check for however many. But I don't know how this, what is the ultimate goal?
Are the three sets of recommendations that are listed here. That's the ultimate goal of this bill. Is to protect the unmarked graves and the lands. To support the repatriation of the remains of the children. Many of the children died in the residential schools, either from diseases, from abuse, or from freezing to death trying to run away. All right, so they want to find those children. There's a T-shirt I didn't show you the image of from the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition that says on the front, "Bring our children home."
Yeah, there are Canada has been doing this for a bit longer, and there's some really powerful examples in Canada where they have hundreds and hundreds of children's remains at some of those graves. And so there's some powerful, you can find the videos too, I've seen somewhere. They really do a ceremonial, just a nice ceremony for the children's remains, bringing them home and then giving them the burial that fits their culture and traditions. And it's very moving. So that's part of the idea. If they can identify some of the children's remains, can they support bringing them home to their tribal communities and having a proper burial in accordance with their own traditions?
So that's the repatriation part, and then to stop this is the third part. So those are the goals of this bill, should it pass. And in this Congress, a bipartisan bill.
I don't know that there are.
Jesus is gonna come back before that happens.
Well, it's already passed through the committee structure of the Senate. So we're getting there.
Is there looking at the mission system in California? I would assume that was a bigger issue than boarding schools, but I may be wrong.
It's a different issue than boarding schools. And that's not covered either in the ELCA truth-seeking, truth-telling initiative or by this bill. But it certainly warrants, and the state of California has, I don't know the details of the responsibility the state has taken, but there has been legislation in that regard, because the mission structure was wholly different than the reservation structure.
Thank you for your presentation. And actually, I have more of a comment versus a question, and that is, I am very surprised that California U.S. senators, both Alex Padilla and Adam Schiff, are apparently mute on this topic. It is, well, stunning. In particular, I mean, I'll just, thinking outside the box here, Alex Padilla himself, as a Latin American, many people of Latin American heritage come from indigenous heritage as well. And plus, well, we are California. So my comment is, I'm just simply surprised that, again, there's that complete silence of these two powerful senators in the most supposedly influential state in the country are just, well, mum's the word. So thank you.
And I was equally as stunned by that. I think maybe we could help fix that oversight on their part. Get out a pen or your computer, send them a note. Ask them to support Senate Bill 761.
Schiff's voicemail box is always full because I call him regularly, but you can send them both notes online.
Yeah, Einstein's was always full too. I think it's the same mailbox.
He needs to clear out his messages. But it is possible. It is possible to contact all of our representatives in Congress. Their websites are usually the first go-to because they have a form, or you can mail them something at the Senate offices. And it is, yeah, I think them seeing support from their constituents for this bill could influence them to put their names on it.
Just simply ask them to co-sponsor Senate Bill 761. You don't need to go on and on. You can write one sentence, send it to them.
Well, has there been any formal approach to them? I mean, they have these hill days, right? Where people go around visiting.
I don't know. Yeah, I
That
don't
might
know.
be part of the problem, and they have a lot on their plate right now, in fairness.
Do they?
Yeah, and it will be investigated by Trump. That's his penalty list.
All right. Anything else?
Thank you.
Yeah.
John, were you stretching or?
Tennis elbow stretch.
Oh, okay. Just checking. All right, well, thank you very much. Next week, there will be a report from council during the adult forum time. So if you want to learn about what's going on at St. Mark's, and I think we all do, come back next week. And next year on this very same Sunday, Orange Shirt Day. You have a year to find your orange shirt.
We also have some great events planned for Native American Heritage Month in November. A speaker from the American Indian Cultural Association lined up, and we have been trying to get in touch with them for years, so we're very excited that they're finally coming. So we'll get those dates posted, but we do like to do some commemorations during November as well. So keep your eye on the forum calendar. So, yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Without Peter.